Hi everyone, again my name is Miranda Wei. I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington, and today I'm here to present work done with my amazing co-authors Pardis, Franzi, and Yoshi on gender stereotypes. Stereotypes are ubiquitous, and even though gender is not binary, there are binary stereotypical beliefs about gender in the US, and I'll use the stereotypical pink and blue to demonstrate just some of them. So they exist in personal characteristics. Wow, I cannot push this button. For example, that women are nurturing or men are logical. They are closely linked to domestic gender roles, which dictate that women are stay-at-home mothers while men are breadwinners. And the full impact of gender stereotypes is something that is actively studied by social scientists to this day. But one of the most consistent impacts is how gender influences the chosen academic major or careers. All this to say, gender stereotypes can color people's perceptions, motivations, and behaviors, so how might these translate to security and privacy? Before we continue, let's start with a definition of stereotypes. In Schneider's 2004 book, reviewing over a century of literature on stereotypes, the most basic definition he gives is qualities perceived to be associated with particular groups or categories of people. So stereotypes are about groups, generalizations about all women or all men, and not necessarily about specific individuals. And in this way, trying to evaluate whether stereotypes are true or false by empirically sampling some individuals misses the point. Regardless of whether stereotypes are true at an individual level, it detracts from the primary value of stereotypes as a concept, which is to study group-level dynamics. So we study stereotypes as a group-level dynamic in security and privacy research for two main reasons. First, we know from other fields that gender stereotypes cause harm, like harassment or fewer opportunities, and further, prior work shows that people who do not believe these biases exist are more likely to perpetuate them. As an example, imagine that someone is receiving help setting up an account. Would they receive different advice because of their gender? Well, if the person giving advice holds gender stereotypes, they might assume that a woman is less technical and not bother explaining 2FA to them, and that would lower the woman's security and privacy and become a self-perpetuating harmful cycle. So second, we study gender stereotypes because they're a potential contributing cause to gender differences, whereas prior work found mainly correlations. For example, that women are less likely to make secure passwords, less likely to use private browsing, or more susceptible to phishing. Stereotypes are a potential causal mechanism for these differences, which gets us closer to understanding the root cause. So the research questions for this work are: what gender stereotypes about women or men do people in the US hold about everyday security and privacy? And what rationales do people give to justify their gender stereotypes? Before I get into how we answer those questions, aligned with feminist research, I'd like to draw attention to positionality. Our position as researchers and our identities influence the research that we do. So the research team for this work was 2 cisgender women, 2 cisgender men, all of whom had lived in the US at least 6 years and have observed gender stereotyping in security and privacy. Each research team will have different research approaches, and our work is motivated towards raising awareness and combating gender stereotypes. All right, so how do we do that? We used a mixed methods approach to study gender stereotypes. In the pre-study, we conducted a survey with 202 US crowd workers on Prolific, which helped us identify 9 potential stereotypes. Please see the paper for more detail on the pre-study. And in the second step, we used affinity diagramming to select more potential stereotypes. Affinity diagramming is a process used for grouping data items, which we use to select potential stereotypes about user behaviors. We consulted 2 papers about security advice and 1 paper about user security behaviors. And from this affinity diagramming, we developed a list of 5 positive or protective security and privacy actions and 5 negative. Then in our main study, we evaluated the 19 stereotypes from the pre-study and the affinity diagramming. We again surveyed US prolific crowd workers and asked about their stereotype beliefs, which we did by asking them, who is more likely to X? And then we asked follow-up questions about why. Finally, we concluded with the ASI, a sexism scale, and demographics. A few other notes about our main survey instrument. One concern we had was that, oh my gosh. Thank you for bearing with me. One concern we had was that our survey could have triggered social desirability bias, or that participants would just tell us what they thought we wanted to hear. So to mitigate this, we emphasized at the beginning that there were no right or wrong answers. We also thought carefully about ethics. Our study was deemed exempt by the UW IRB, but we were also concerned that the survey might validate gender stereotypes, which was not our intention. So to mitigate this, we made our survey as neutral as possible through many rounds of iteration and pilot testing. All right, what did we find? First, let's look at stereotypes about women in computer security and privacy. This graph will show the proportion of participants who responded about each potential stereotype towards women in green or towards men in purple. So out of the 19 stereotypes, for 5 of them, a significant portion of participants indicated that women would be more likely to share sensitive information on social media, be emotional, fall for shopping scams, ask for help if they have questions, or be gullible. So notice that 4 out of the 5 here are negative stereotypes about women. Next, what stereotypes exist about men when it comes to security and privacy? Here's a similar graph split into 2 parts to fit on the slide, and we found 10 stereotypes where participants believed that men would be more likely to be overconfident, know how to protect, be skilled at protecting, be logical, verify HTTPS, install software updates immediately, be interested in learning about and protecting, being perceptive, use 2FA, or use antivirus software. And we can see that 9 out of the 10 stereotypes were positive security and privacy traits or actions. To add one more detail, we also investigated whether participants' gender was correlated with the stereotypes they believed, and we found 4 stereotypes where men in our study believed them and women did not. So men in our study thought that men would be more likely than women to be logical, be perceptive, use 2FA, and use antivirus software. On the other hand, participant gender was not correlated with any of the stereotypes about women. How did belief in stereotypes vary based on participant sexism? So we measured participant sexism with the ambivalent sexism inventory, which is a validated scale for sexism from the psychology literature. And here are all 19 potential stereotypes that we looked at, including 4 that we didn't find to be stereotypes overall. This gray highlight shows the stereotype beliefs that were believed by more sexist participants or participants who scored higher on the ASI, all but 3 of the stereotypes. Additionally, out of the beliefs that were not stereotypes overall, we found that participants who were more sexist were more likely to believe that women would be more lazy, leave devices unlocked, and reuse passwords. Now let's look at some rationales that participants gave as to why they believe stereotypes. Many participants explained their stereotype beliefs with other stereotypes. So, for example, one participant explained that women have a tendency to be compassionate and listen to others, which gives the scammers the opportunity to fool them. Other reasons participants gave stemmed from societal discourse. One participant described the social coding of security and technology hobbies as masculine. Another participant wrote about revenge success, that women are seen by society as worse with technology, so they would be more interested in learning a lot to prove others wrong. And one last reason were gender threat models. Our participants assumed different genders would value security or understand threats differently. For example, one participant assumed men probably have more to hide on their devices, like lockup porn history, while another described that women are more often targets of cyberstalking, doxing campaigns, and more, so they have more obvious reasons to learn. So coming to the conclusion of my talk, I'll give you a recap of the results. We find empirical evidence for negative stereotypes about women. Stereotypes about women assumed that they would be emotional, gullible, and more likely to take poor security and privacy actions. On the other hand, stereotypes about men were mostly positive, that they would engage with relevant topics or take protective actions. We found that participants who were more sexist were more likely to believe in gender stereotypes. And finally, participants' rationales often reference the broader social context, like other social stereotypes or societal expectations outside of security and privacy. When I first started this work on gender stereotypes, this was some of the feedback that I received, that the research lacks scientific merit and is not addressing the most urgent problem facing society. I'm here because I want to empower people who are interested and do want to study these problems. Ultimately, gender is one of the most impactful social organizing principles in our world. As just one example, over a lifetime in the US, the median woman will make $590,000 less than the median man just because of gender. In recognition of this and other disparities, the United Nations has recognized gender equality as one of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a globally shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people. I believe that gender and other social factors are some of the most urgent questions in security and privacy research. But let me give you some more concrete recommendations. For practitioners who are building systems, hopefully this is obvious, but avoid gender stereotypes and reinforcing them, like if evaluations use gendered personas. Also, this work emphasizes that there is no average user and that there can always be hidden assumptions about who systems work for and who they do not. For researchers now, especially if you work with crowd workers, keep in mind that participants come with their own biases. We documented gender stereotypes in the crowd worker population, and it's likely that other populations also hold gender stereotypes. We found that the ASI is a good proxy for stereotype belief if that is relevant to your research question. And finally, future work should investigate the impact of specific stereotypes that we identified. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned the example of getting different security advice based on gender. We found stereotypes that men are more interested in security and privacy, lending evidence to the idea that men might receive higher quality or more supportive security advice than women. Another specific impact to investigate is stereotype threat, or when oppressed groups are reminded of negative stereotypes about themselves and may perform worse on a task as a result. So, for example, during account setup, if a woman were reminded of her gender, would she be less likely to use 2FA? This work is just one small step in regarding gender as a social construct. Future work should also probe other disparate impacts of gender on security and privacy simply because of the ways people imagine gender. Ultimately, the goal of this research is to better understand how gender impacts security and privacy so we can improve security and privacy for all. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions now.
Okay, awesome talk. Any questions?
Hi. Sorry, asking a lot of questions. I love all the talks.
Love it. Thank you.
So yes, so one question is, this is about the user perception, right? But did you get an opportunity to, in a way, educate them with what the actual scenario is? For example, by research, through research, it has been shown that men are more susceptible to dating scams. Were you able to kind of show those results to the participants, or in a way educate them, or in your results do a correlation between them?
That's a really interesting idea. We did not do that in the scope of this study. We were only interested in the stereotypes that people held, and I think education and the combating of stereotypes is a really important direction for future work. Happy to talk more about that afterwards.
I'm really excited. And just wanted to mention both your and Kelsey's work, like in these stereotypes, mentors really help. For example, personally, I work in cybersecurity. I'm told always that I'm a social scientist, not a cybersecurity specialist. And yesterday, actually, one of the people I find myself as mentor really told me that, be proud of that. And so both of these works are really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, you had mentioned early on iterating over your survey instrument to try and limit the chances that it would reinforce the stereotypes that you were asking questions about. Do you have any insights or advice on how to construct survey instruments towards that kind of neutrality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what we tried to do was just use very neutral wording and sort of just elicit what participants were thinking. So we didn't explicitly call out anything already existing in security and privacy. We sort of just asked, who is more likely to do this behavior or have this trait? I do think the nature of some of the things that we picked are already very gendered. Like we asked about overconfidence. We didn't ask about confidence, but we asked about overconfidence because that's what came up in our pre-study. And so that was one of the things that we thought about. Like, is that already gendered or is that neutral enough? But generally, we just tried to ask, like, who is more likely to do this without making assumptions about what participants would say in the first place, yeah.
Okay, great. So we're actually a little bit over. So if you have a question, yeah, you can find Miranda afterwards. So let's thank Miranda one more time for an awesome talk.